Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Igniting Lifelong Literacy, a Chippewa River Writing Project approach. We're excited that you are joining us and tuning in through whatever listening method you choose. Before we get started with our content today, I would like to read our land acknowledgement. The Chippewa River Writing Project is based at Central Michigan University, located in Mount Pleasant, Michigan. Founded in 1892 as Central Michigan Normal School, CMU is located on the ancestral grounds of the Council of Three Fires, the Anishinaabe, of whom the Saginaw Chippewa Nation is one. Ceded under duress in the 1855 and 1864 treaties, this land was named the Isabella Indian Reservation and remains part of the homeland of the Saginaw Chippewa Indian tribe. It is our responsibility to care for this land and its people, and to be intentional and inclusive in our work. We recognize that this acknowledgement is only meaningful when combined with purposeful actions and genuine relationships that honor the land and its people. These actions include abdicating for the histories, cultures, languages, and the territorial rights of historic Indigenous peoples. As our writing project grows to include members from outside Mount Pleasant, we invite all CRWP members to recognize their own connection to the lands on which they reside and honor their own responsibilities to the original keepers of those lands. In case you forgot, since it's been a month, I'm just one of your hosts of this podcast. My name is Becky Schwartz, and my partner in crime, so to speak, is Lyndsay Young. If you want to know more about us, we encourage you to listen to our introduction episode for this season, all about the topic of independent reading, or go back and listen to season 1, which is on the science of reading versus balanced literacy. I'm also going to introduce our guest today before we get started. This is Jeremey Hull. I'm going to let him introduce himself and talk a little bit more about his background.
My name is Jeremey Hull, and I'm in my 15th year as an English teacher, primarily in middle school, but I've also been teaching 9th grade ELA and debate for the past year and a half at Lakeland High School, which is in White Lake, Michigan. Prior to Lakeland, I taught online for 5 years with Michigan Virtual Charter Academy. Teaching has kind of become a second career for me. I worked as a writer and editor for 10 years before even becoming a teacher. I wrote for newspapers, magazines, and even the Civil Rights Department in Detroit. Having the ability to get paid for playing with words was a dream come true, because other than bartending, there wasn't much else I could do. I moved over to teaching after working with journalism students at a local high school, and I had a lot of wild ideas then about sharing my love of reading and writing with my students. But as most English teachers know, not every single kid is going to share their love of reading. And maintaining ongoing and engaging independent reading in my classroom has been kind of an evolving circus that depends entirely on the room. Thankfully, at my current school, we have a large media center with a very enthusiastic librarian who helps my freshmen find books that can hold their interest for 10 minutes or longer a day. I also have a sizable library in my classroom if they can't find anything in the school library.
Thank you for introducing yourself, Jeremey. I like that term that you used, evolving circus, because I think that really kind of goes along with assessment. And that's really what we've been talking about these last 2 episodes. So today we're going to begin our 4th episode in our 5-part series on the topic of independent reading. This podcast today is going to be focused on summative assessment with independent reading. Summative assessments are those end-of-unit assessments. If you're looking for more formative and quick checks for understanding, go ahead and pause and listen to our previous episode. The strategies we're going to talk about in this episode assumes that you've been doing those formative assessment checks along the way. I'm going to turn it over to Lyndsay now, who's going to talk about the elementary side of summative assessment when it comes to reading.
So in elementary school, the way we assess independent reading through summative assessment takes on various forms, and there's different ways we do it that show the understanding and engagement with that text they had during the book and then after the book. So as I mentioned in previous podcasts, my school uses Being a Reader from Collaborative Classroom, and we use Jennifer Saravello's Complete Comprehension Toolkit. And these resources really allow us as teachers to assess students in a formative way during their independent reading sessions while also meeting with them to discuss their reading goals, comprehension strategies, and misconceptions as they are reading. And you're probably thinking, wait, this is about summative assessment. You've already talked about formative assessment, but I'll get to that connection as I am kind of talking about what my school does with showing their reading after they're done reading. So since formative assessments happen throughout the book, the summative assessment acts as that final experience that they're having with the book. So it demonstrates to us their understanding and engagement in a very meaningful way. Instead of relying on those written tests, we evaluate them in kind of a different way. So we use book talks, book trailers, book reviews, small group discussions to assess their understanding after they have read. The things I'm looking for normally are that they're able to identify those themes in their books that are important to the book. Also, that they're able to identify those key details, the main plots, those important key events that really led to the character's development. Those are things I'm looking for at the end of the book. I'm also looking for them to summarize the book in some way. Summarizing is very difficult for students, especially with chapter books. They're such large books. You're like, okay, what do I choose as these important key events? So I look for those as I am kind of using these different summative assessments at the ends of their books. So I use book talks for them to summarize key details, discuss the development of their characters, share their personal connections with the book. We also use, to record students, we use Seesaw. So that is an app my school utilizes. It's a learning, it's like an app, a learning portfolio where students can post their assignments and post projects so their parents can see it and also other students can see it. And the reason we do this is because based on research, which we like to base what we do on research, it shows the oral discussion can enhance comprehension by 35% as it requires students to express their thoughts clearly. And that's what I'm having them do. I'm orally having them talk about the book to persuade others to want to read the book and share their thoughts and connections with the book. We also do book trailers. These are inspired obviously by movie trailers. You probably have all heard of book trailers before. So the way we do this and what I'm looking for normally is for them to, again, summarize that story without giving spoilers. We talk about spoilers are not allowed, but also talking about themes, major events, and we talk about how you want to choose events from the rising action that are going to get the reader's attention, right? And normally those really important rising action events are the events that you want your reader to remember, and those are the major events you would put into a summary. So we talk about that as well. And then another choice my students have are book reviews. So students are going to share or do share their persuasive reviews on as to why someone should choose their book. They give a summary of the book, the rating, and why they would give it that rating. And I even tell them, I'm like, if you didn't enjoy the book, you can give it a bad rating, right? And kids like to be critical of books and they like to give those. I mean, it's kind of fun for them to see like, oh, not all books are amazing. There are some books that aren't very well written. And we talk about those too. So it gives them power as readers to identify books that are meaningful to them and maybe ones that aren't so meaningful. But again, I'm still looking for those key aspects to evaluate them on. I'm looking for the summaries. I'm looking for themes. I'm looking for main idea. I'm looking for all those things that show that they understand the book overall. The last thing we use for summative assessments, I was about to say formative, small group discussions, and students participate in these small groups as they are reading text. So while summative assessments allow for celebration and reflection, I really do place greater emphasis on those formative assessments because they provide that continuous insight into the student's comprehension and their engagement as they are reading. So I look for, are they using reading strategies? Are they focused on the text? Are they monitoring their comprehension? Are they reading fluently? Are they reading accurately? I do a lot of that during reading conferences. So I do use summative assessments for that end of the book, but for me, I really do emphasize the formative assessments because that's when they're actually reading the text and really working with that text. And it helps me to know what kind of intervention I need to provide for my students. But again, I do summative assessments with my students, more or less as a celebration. As they finish the book, they get excited about doing the book talks, book trailers, and book reviews, and it keeps them wanting to read more. So these are my thoughts on summative assessment.
Unsurprisingly, I'm going to talk a lot about some of the same things that Lyndsay did. For me, summative assessments are kind of that capstone piece, that really big celebration, reflection, looking back, but also using it as a way to really highlight those skills that we work on throughout English class. So I have students read a book of their choosing every quarter in my classroom. This is about a book every 6 to 7 weeks, plus all of the other reading that we do in my class. My goal is to always increase their reading volume as well as complexity of what they're reading. And I've discussed this in previous episodes, but it's essentially a balancing act, or to borrow Jeremy's term, an evolving circus. I give my students lots of choice in the summative assessment because I do so much formative assessment throughout their reading process that I know what they're getting out of the book and what they focus on with it. So I'm looking at, again, this is an opportunity for them to practice those skills like summarization, evidence building, argument forming, character growth, theme, analysis. So I have what I call a hyperdoc, and it's not really what I call it. It is. It's a document where it has all of my choices, the directions, the resources linked in it. And students pick a new project every quarter. I've spent hours talking about this hyperdoc before, and I could spend hours talking about it again. I'm actually going to be talking about it at the Michigan Reading Association's annual conference in Grand Rapids in March. But for the sake of being brief, I will talk to you first about just some of the topics or some of the ideas that you could glimpse for projects in your own classroom from my hyperdoc. So the first is a short story from a new perspective. So students use this as a chance to pick a scene from the book that they've read and tell it from another character's perspective, or a few key scenes. They write figurative language into the story, and they try to mimic the author's style of writing just from a different character's perspective. This seems to not directly be focused on skills high school students need, because when you get to about 11th grade, the amount of narrative writing students do, according to the Common Core state standards, kind of drops off. I think it really is an opportunity for students to show their understanding and careful reading analysis and like what they're getting from the author's style of writing. And that's really hard to do. Another project that is really popular in my room is a bento box. If you eat a lot of Asian cuisine, you know that their meals are often composed of small amounts of food of different types and textures and pieces of the meal. And they really play an important part together because it really creates this kind of musical of flavors and textures and tastes. But I'm getting kind of on a different rabbit hole here. This is really focused on symbols. Students pick 6 important symbols or ideas that are related to the book, and they write a short paragraph about each of these on Google Slides with some pictures. They have to connect that item back to the book and explain how it relates to plot, characters, themes, etc. They have to cite it, so it's a chance for them to practice quoting, paraphrasing, citing, and evidence selection. The other one that is really popular, but I do have to caution you, and I caution my students about this all the time, and there's usually 1 or 2 that fall victim to it still every year. But going down a rabbit hole of music selection, I let them make a music playlist for their book. So this teaches them how to cite both music and quotes from their books, and they create a playlist of 10 songs that connect to the book's events, the characters, the key moods. It's a lot of work. Like I said, they fall down the rabbit hole of music, right? It's really easy to start listening to a song and then be caught up. The next thing you know, 3 hours have gone by and you've only selected your music, right? So I think that's the hardest thing about this project, is to just not have the kids go down the rabbit hole of getting lost in their music. My students also really like designing their own book covers and jackets for the books. I have some requirements, but these are really, really customizable. If you've ever tried creating something that honors and represents a book, characters, the author's words, all of the accolades the author has had, an author bio, quotes, a book blurb, and images, it's really difficult. The amount, and I talk to my students about this all the time, publishers have entire departments that just spend days designing cover and talking about color choices and pictures and mock-ups. So for this, it's really kind of an interesting exercise to have students kind of take that place and think about how they would design the book cover, how it would bring somebody in and tell them enough about the book that they might want to read it. And then finally, the last one I'm going to talk about is something that I've kind of borrowed from the business world, which is called a one-pager. But it's an idea that you take a topic and you distill what is essential about that topic down to one single page. And students can do this with their book. They can talk about themes, characters, figurative language, key ideas, conflicts on a one-pager. Again, it's full of choice. There's lots of elements of visual as well as words. And the beauty of it, it's also the curse, but the beauty in the curse is that it's one single page. So this is really an exercise in organization and picking the most important concepts to put in your one-pager. All right, Jeremy, let's head back to you. What do you do in your classroom for summative assessment with independent reading?
So, what's the long-term goal of independent reading in my classroom? Other than to spend 10 minutes each day enjoying some quiet time with a story, I think it can be an excellent method of connecting their reading skills to a text of their choice, rather than a whole class analyzing the same text like we currently do with To Kill a Mockingbird. My summative assessments for independent reading tend to be, like the name, very truly summative, meaning that they fall many months after we even begin first selecting our independent choice reading books. So for the first semester, we concentrate on getting comfortable with the very idea of reading quietly for 10 minutes. Because for some ninth graders, this can be a new concept for them. I know all the ELA teachers out there listening to this right now might be screaming, how awesome would it be to have time to sit and read quietly for 10 minutes with no demands or distractions? But for some teens, anytime they are asked to put their phone away and follow an old-fashioned book can be seen as work. So my first semester is spent doing just that, practicing the expectations of independent reading with daily mini lessons connected to that reading. For example, if we are studying indirect and direct characterization, I'll prompt my class to make that an area of focus in their daily reading. Or it could be sensory details, whatever. And then, following each 10-minute reading time, I'll relate examples that I saw in my reading and invite them to share theirs. So it's pretty low stakes in the beginning. And then by Friday, they have a weekly check-in form to complete in Google Forms. During these check-ins, I'll ask them to summarize their reading for the week, relate one of the lesson objective examples that we focused on, and describe their feelings toward the book. See if it's keeping their attention or if they need to maybe make a change. By the time we hit the second semester, my ninth graders have a sizable toolkit of reading skills and literary elements to work with as they finally start looking toward the final project. The first part they receive is a list of 40 to 45 different literary devices and examples of writer's craft, most of which we've already reviewed and studied. These can include plot, conflict, point of view, figurative language, sound devices, and so on. Each day that they read, they create an annotation for one of these examples in their reading log. So for example, if they identify an example of a metaphor in their reading, they note the page number, quote the example, and then give an explanation. Another option they have is to respond to the text by describing a connection. And this could be a text to self about something in the story that had occurred to them in their lives that was similar to something in their story. It can be a text to world, something similar that they remember from history or current events. Or it can even be text to text, anything about their story that reminds them of something from another book. The second and final part of their independent reading project is to create a visual to display their understanding of the book. And I give them a choice of 11 different methods to do this. Because what's wrong with choice? Everybody loves a choice. Even teachers, when we're given a choice, I think it makes life a little bit more easy. So, these examples include, first, a letter to the author, where they write a 500-word letter to the author about the book or their writing process. A timeline of events, which is an illustrated timeline with at least 10 important events in the story, explaining what happened and why it's important. A Jeopardy PowerPoint with 4 categories with 4 answers and questions each. A character scrapbook from the character's point of view on their experiences. These would include 10 slides with pictures representing the conflict, setting, and events from the plot. Character trading cards for at least 10 characters, describing who they are and important facts about them. Each card would have a drawn or computer-created picture on the front with a summary on the back. They can interview a character with 20 minimum questions about their life and experiences in the story. They could create a book playlist of at least 10 songs that represent the character, setting, conflict, and theme. Each song needs to include a paragraph to explain the connection between the song and the book. They could write an alternative ending using the same characters and plot, but having a different outcome. They could write 5 news articles about events in the book. They could do a year in the life, which is a 12-month calendar with important events and pictures of the characters and setting. And lastly, and this has kind of become a popular one throughout the last couple of years, is a restaurant menu inspired by their book. So they would include at least 10 items explaining the connection between the item and some aspect of the book. And this is an area where my students have gotten really creative, and it's been really fascinating seeing what appetizers or entrees or desserts or even types of drinks, mock cocktails, of course, that they could really stretch and connect to different parts of their books. So one area that requires some pivoting is if a student doesn't like their book halfway, or they begin their project halfway through a book and need to start another. This is obviously up to the individual teacher's discretion, but I'm never really that big of a drill sergeant about this. I mean, all I ask of my kids is to read a book and respond intellectually and creatively. And if that means they blow through a half dozen books in the process, then all the better.
Thank you so much for sharing all that, Jeremy. You have a really dynamic and really creative summative assessment system for your classroom, especially with independent reading. I love all of the choice and all of the rigor that goes in this, as well as just giving students freedom and room to grow. You really take them where they are and push them to a completely different creative thinking level and critical thinking level. So thank you so much for sharing and joining us on this episode. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lyndsay, who's going to do the outro for us.
Thanks again for joining us on our 4th official episode. We'll be back in April with episode 5 on our 5-part series of independent reading. We are taking a brief pause due to Becky and I being at Michigan Reading Association's conference on March 7th through the 9th. Hopefully, we will see you there. If you want to let us know how we are doing, or if you have any questions or any ideas, what we should cover next, reach out to us anytime through our email, ignitecrwppodcast383@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter through the Chippewa River Writing Project pages. We are at Chippewa River WP. Fire up, and we'll see you soon.